Council Manager Workshop for Tuesday, November 13th. First thing we will do is, how's everybody doing? Is it cold enough for everybody? It's pretty cold tonight, isn't it?
It should get warmer tomorrow.
I hope so, right?
40
It's been crazy.
something.
An early start to winter.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. First, we'll have a roll call. City Manager Coleman?
Thank you, Mayor Slawik. Councilmember Juniman? Here. Councilmember Zhang?
Here.
Councilmember Abrams? Here. Note that Councilmember Smith is not with us this evening, and Mayor Slawik.
Here, thank you. Next, approval of agenda.
Second.
It's been moved by Abrams and seconded by Zhang. Approval of agenda. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Hearing ayes, all, the agenda is approved. We have no unfinished business. And council members, we really just have one item on the agenda tonight, so we'll try to keep it to about 50 minutes. Presentation about the enhancement of Maplewood Area Economic Development Authority. So with that, I'm going to turn to City Manager Coleman.
Thank you, Mayor Slawik. Tonight, the policy issue that we're bringing before you is how to look at the EDA powers, and also Mr. Beatty is going to give you examples of representative projects from other cities that provide, and we've also provided a list of the current TIF financing projects in the city of Maplewood. This presentation tonight is informational. I know that you've been interested in EDA and trying to get some programs started. I think this will give you a broad overview of the types of things that we can do here in the city. What I would like to have you do is, if you think it's appropriate tonight, ask staff to prepare an amended enabling resolution which would consolidate the authority of the EDA to the City Council. Right now, part of it is split between the City Council and the Housing and Economic Development Commission. So that would update that document. We would have a public hearing on that sometime in the future if you choose to go in that direction. And with that, I would like, Mayor, for you to call on our City Attorney, Mr. Beatty, who's actually put together the report and the presentation for this evening.
Okay, thank you, City Manager Coleman. Mr. Beatty?
Yes, Mayor and Council, thank you. Well, as the city manager indicated, I put together a packet that includes a number of things that I'd like to talk about. We've been sort of threatening to talk about the EDA for 4 or 5 months, and so here we are. I kind of want to accomplish 4 things, or want to touch upon 4 things tonight. One is, again, just sort of the general overview as to why I think EDAs are the preferable economic development tool if the city wants to go forward with that. Secondly, as the manager indicated, I've put together a PowerPoint with some representative projects that I'll talk about a little bit. Thirdly, what I really want to do is prompt some discussion among council members and get a sense of what you want to do, where you want to go. It's also an opportunity to ask questions about EDAs and their various powers and what we might be able to do. And then finally, I do have a specific recommendation, as the manager said, about the amended enabling resolution if you choose to go forward. And then I can also give you a little hint about some further steps that will come after that if that's what the council wishes to do. I guess one of the first things is, why are we having this as a council meeting rather than an EDA meeting? And the reason I think that makes sense is because even though the EDA is a separate legal entity, it really is the product of the city council. The city council creates the EDA through an enabling resolution, can limit its authority or powers any way it wishes, could end the EDA if it wished to. And so really I thought it was appropriate for the city council to have a discussion, because again, ultimately the decision, if you want to go forward and fully empower the existing EDA, it would be the council authorizing the preparation of an amended enabling resolution to be brought back before the council at a public hearing. We talked previously about why EDAs, in my opinion, make the most sense from the standpoint of authority. And again, just very briefly, there are a number of other entities that can legally engage in development and redevelopment activities, including the city itself. The original extra entity that was created under state law, and actually in 1947, were HRAs, and for many, many years, that was the standard development entity. In fact, the city has one from the early 70s. There are port authorities, and there are also EDAs. EDAs have, in my experience, become the preferred development entity because, as I mentioned previously, they have the unique ability to operate under 3 statutes. Under the City Development District statute, which allows cities to engage in economic development activities, under the 1947 HRA Act, and under the 1987 EDA Act. And so I think that most cities have recognized that if they want to enable themselves to have the full range of powers, that an EDA is the proper entity to do that. The EDA will operate in under all 3 statutes. Sometimes which statute the body is operating under won't necessarily be entirely clear, but it doesn't really matter. Once you have all of those authorities under one roof, then you can pretty much do what you want. Just as I suppose in broad terms, why are there separate entities? I guess one way to look at it is HRAs were, again, the original creature, and they were created specifically to promote housing and redevelopment, urban renewal, and so forth. EDAs have actually broader power, which I would characterize as economic development. Certainly includes those other powers, but it's a broader purview. And so there are things that EDAs can do that HRAs can't do. The opposite is not true, because the EDA has all the powers of an HRA. So what I thought one way to lead off would be to show you a few slides of representative projects. So if we could have that, is that up? All right. I'm going to talk sort of quickly about some of these projects. I don't think focusing on the details is all that important, because these are projects in other cities, but I selected them for this reason. These are projects that I have worked on in the last couple of years, so I'm familiar with them and can answer any questions that you have. But I selected these particular ones because I think they illustrate the broad range of the types of projects that EDAs can become involved with. This is a project in Chanhassen. As you can tell, this is a building no longer there that is immediately next door to the Chanhassen Dinner Theater. It was sort of a tired commercial site. It's been replaced with a mixed-use development with a grocery store on the first floor and market-rate apartments above. And it's important to note that those are market-rate apartments. They're not subsidized apartments, or they're not income-limited apartments. This was, and this is another view, that's a view of the back of the building. It's actually an interesting building. There are actually 2 different structures sort of stacked on top of each other, and they're done that way because of different ownership and some shared parking. But it was a redevelopment tax increment district, which is one of the preferred types of districts because of its longevity. This qualified as a redevelopment district because that structure that you saw was structurally substandard, and that allowed the city or the EDA, Chanhassen EDA, to create this as a redevelopment district. If it were a housing district, there would have to be income limitations on the residents in that development, but because it qualified as a redevelopment district, the city was able to assist both market rate apartments as well as the retail establishment. this is in downtown Chanhassen. You can see some of the details there. The assistance was granted through pay-as-you-go financing, which is my preferred way of doing this for reasons that I mentioned before and will continue to talk about. This is not a very good photo of a project in Cottage Grove. What you're looking at is a 450,000, I think, square foot industrial facility that is going to be expanded. This is an even worse photo, but if you can see the red square up to the upper left, I don't know if that's northwest or not, but that's going to be another 400 and some thousand square foot expansion. The reason I included this is because it's an economic development district. When I talked a minute ago about one of the differences between HRAs and EDAs, this is the kind of project that EDAs can do. Cottage Grove spent quite a bit of time a number of years ago creating an industrial park. This is one of the buildings in there. That's something that EDAs can do. This didn't qualify. This would not have qualified as a redevelopment district because there was nothing substandard about any of the structures. That obviously didn't qualify as a housing district. So the only other choice was economic development. That's sort of the worst type of district in the sense that it's only an 8-year district as opposed to a 25-year district, but it is something that's available sort of when all else fails. There's a list of uses that are the only ones that you can put in there. This happens to be a manufacturing facility, and that's one of the permitted uses. But again, that's something that EDAs can do using their EDA authority. This, again, in Cottage Grove, is a housing project done by Dominium. Obviously, this was a housing district, or is a housing district, which means that it is income limited, as I know a number of the projects here are. Again, pay-as-you-go financing, and there are also housing revenue bonds, as is so often the case with income-limited housing. This is Robbinsdale. The building that's sort of in the center of the photo is a former Rainbow grocery store which closed next to a retail facility which was limping along. The building in the upper portion of the photo is something that's being used by the hospital, which is just down the road. The building to the right is the former Terrace Theater. There was quite a bit of controversy about this time 2 years ago on the removal of that theater. There it is. It was a building that was built in the 1950s, had a great deal of architectural significance at the time, had been allowed to deteriorate. I was one of the last people in that building, and believe me, it qualified as structurally substandard. So again, a redevelopment district qualifying as a redevelopment district, but being utilized for commercial purposes. The theater's gone, the old grocery store and retail is gone, and a new Hy-Vee, which is now the only grocery store in Robbinsdale, opened about a month ago. Again, pay-as-you-go financing. One of the things that I'll talk about a little bit later is compliance with the Business Subsidy Act. Housing is exempt from business subsidy requirements, but non-housing projects in general are not. This one happened to be exempt because the developer put in the requisite percentage of site costs, but most non-housing projects are going to be subject to business subsidy requirements, which basically comes down to wages and jobs. This is another Robbinsdale project. The site in question is the one to the left with the little red flag on the top of it. It was an underutilized commercial structure and large area of unused parking, which again qualify, along with some adjacent older substandard single-family houses, qualified as a redevelopment district. This is the market rate building that is being built at this time. Another view of that building. This has been an important tool because Robbinsdale is a city that feels like it has plenty of affordable housing, and they've actually been quite interested in getting more upscale housing. Again, the details of that project, and again, a pay-as-you-go tax increment note. This one I put in because I thought it was kind of an interesting example. It's in South St. Paul, obviously. This is a former office building that was abandoned, no longer used, and the city was concerned about its further deterioration. It was in a redevelopment project area, and it was converted to housing. Again, qualified as a redevelopment district. There weren't really going to be too many exterior modifications to the building. It was simply going to be converted into 67 market rate apartments, and that was done also with a $1 million pay-as-you-go note. The final one that I wanted to show you was a site in Cokato. This is actually a drawing of or a map of what was going to be in the tax increment district. This shows you an aerial that the east-west road there is Highway 12, and the north-south one is a county highway. It's the main intersection in Cokato. The area that's in the tax increment district is in the northeast quadrant of that area in basically parcels 1, 2, 3, and 4. The reason I'm showing this is because it qualified as a redevelopment district even though it was a largely vacant site. And the reason it was able to qualify is because it met the various numerical tests, which, without getting too far down in the weeds, parcels representing 70% of the district have to be improved. And improved simply means covered by buildings or some form of improvement. Parking qualifies, utilities qualify, 15% has to be qualified. And so the city was able to meet that test and qualify this area as a redevelopment district, even though, again, it was largely vacant, and it was for a Shopko, which was located in the upper portion of the site. Again, pay as you go. And I guess the final, I don't have pictures because there are too many of them, but I wanted to mention the Robbinsdale Scattered Site Project, which I know I've talked about before. That's single-family homes which are selected for removal because they're old and deteriorated and are beginning to have an adverse effect on the neighborhood. The city has been very proactive in trying to excise those from the rest of the city. They've created a number of scattered site redevelopment tax increment districts. Those districts are a little bit of a challenge, but because they are scattered site, each property and each single-family house has to individually qualify as a redevelopment district or as a redevelopment site. And so the city generally has put groups of those together, trying to get 4 to 6 for economic reasons rather than trying to do one at a time. They're a little bit of a challenge because single-family properties, especially relatively low-value single-family properties, don't pay a lot in real estate taxes, despite what some people would believe. It makes it hard, even with a 25-year district, to recover cost. Robbinsdale has the advantage of having a fairly healthy development fund so that they can lose money on some of these deals. They feel like it's been very important, though, to prevent blight from getting a foothold in the community. So that's really all I've got in terms of examples. So turning to the third point, I'd like to answer any questions or hear any discussion that anybody has about any of these matters.
Thank you, Mr. Beatty. I think you did a really good job pointing out examples. One thing I was wondering, way back when I worked on the Oakdale TIF districts, which one was over where Hy-Vee is now. And so in the legislature, we had to bring like the tax chairs out and persuade them and have them involved, as well as they had parcels over where the old Toby's was, which has actually been vacant and there hasn't been anything there for years now. So we can do this just under our own powers, right, to attract this. So any thoughts on, I wonder why they never told us it was maybe too big or bigger, so they had to approach the legislature?
When was that?
Oh, gosh, it was been, let's see,
You were there, right?
2006, maybe 2005. It's been a long time now.
I can't really explain that. I mean, there certainly was a time a little bit before that, late 90s, the early part of the 2000s, in which tax increment was certainly getting a lot of scrutiny from the legislature. There were some people thought it was being abused in some ways, and so the rules were tightened almost every year for a while. That provision about economic development districts used to be you could do pretty much anything, and a number of cities used them to support McDonald's, which may or may not have been a perfectly legitimate use, but that sort of became the poster child of abuse. And so what you now have with economic development districts is that list of uses: manufacturing, distribution, telemarketing. I don't know how that got in there, but you can't do it for retail other than for a very limited purpose. So, but since that period, the legislature has spent less time focusing on this. There was a tax increment bill every year for a number of years, and every time the rules gotten tightened down. And in fact, it got very complicated to do tax increment because you needed to know not only what type of district you were dealing with, but what year it was created, because the rules differed from year to year. The legislature has backed off and hasn't paid as much attention, and so.
No, I think it's obviously it's important to give cities, the latitude to be able to implement policies and structure the TIF districts the way they need to. So I'm glad to see this and glad to see specific examples. We have a couple. Everybody wants to say something. Let's go. Abrams, Juneman Zhang.
Thank you, Mayor. Ron, thank you for this really comprehensive report. I am excited about it. I'm glad that we are moving forward and talking about this. This is a pretty important time for our city right now. We've got several areas in our city that certainly could use some love and certainly some help with redevelopment and development. And so I'm kind of excited. I like this idea. I'll be right up front. I think the idea of looking at an enabling resolution, consolidating this authority in the ADA is the way that I would prefer to go. I think that that's going to be important, that our council be able to have input and steer this thing. I don't think that this is going to, take off really quickly, because I certainly want to make sure that we make intentional decisions, smart decisions, that we figure out what our financing is going to be. We certainly can use our comprehensive plan, the new one that we're looking at tonight, in terms of identifying those areas in our city that might certainly be ripe for this. Certainly Gladstone, I think, falls into this category. But I think that this gives us an opportunity to really plan for our future, which, like other cities, we want to make sure that we are avoiding blight and areas in our city that, that need some attention. And I think that this gives us the tools to do it. And so I think this is a great idea, and thank you very much for putting this forward. It's really fun to see these projects and to see how they can transform an area, bring in jobs and prosperity for our community. So I'm excited about it.
Excellent. Councilmember Juniman.
Thank you. This might be a little obtuse, but leave it to me. On your Robbinsdale scattered site examples, what if you had, under the new comp plan where we have the mixed-use neighborhood category, what if you had like 3 blighted properties or 4 in a row, and you wanted to, I guess, research the idea of replacing them with like a fourplex or twin homes or whatever to increase the density without it being disturbing, shall we say? Is that something you can do in this kind of a setting?
Mr. Beatty?
Yes, Madam Mayor, Council, yes, certainly. The key to the scattered site is finding that you can create a redevelopment district. And in your example, you'd be able to do that. In fact, if the properties were adjacent to one another, you'd only have to have 2 of the 3 buildings be structurally substandard, because all you have to do is have more than 50% of the buildings. The challenge with scattered site is that every separate site has to qualify. So in your example, you would be able to qualify it presumably as a redevelopment district, and then you wouldn't have the income limitations that we talked about for housing districts. You wouldn't have the use limitations from an economic development district. You could do, as I showed you, in most of those districts were redevelopment districts. Once you qualified them, you could use them for other single family, for multifamily, for commercial, depending on what the zoning was. One of the restrictions with redevelopment districts is that 90% of the increment needs to be spent addressing the problems that caused the property to be qualified as a redevelopment district. That's an important thing to focus on, but it can be construed broadly as property acquisition, demolition, infrastructure improvements, site improvements. All of those are things that generally have led the property to qualify as a redevelopment district. So, long answer to your question, yes, once you open the door, you have a great deal of latitude as to what the end product can be.
Thank you. I think of a couple of neighborhoods where that could possibly happen, and so that's why I thought I'd bring it up. Thank you.
Think of Frost English and some of the things happening with properties there right now in that area, and that would make a lot of sense.
And then there's a couple over on Stillwater Road and Century, that whole area where there's some blighted properties, not just residential, but maybe you could do something with mixing it up and help everybody.
Thank you. Good idea. Thank you. Councilmember Jean.
Thank you, Mayor. So I had a question in regards to like the redevelopment parcels and like the different percentages. Does that percentage have to be planned out, like when we're going to ask for the TIF or when we're
Yes.
applying for the TIF? Okay, so it would lock, or it would, the percentage would stay and it can't increase or decrease after that.
Council members, yeah, I mean, what you do when you're considering the creation of a tax increment district is you look at a map and look at the parcels and try to figure out what what is it we're trying to do here? What parcels do we want to include? What parcels do we need to include sometimes in order to meet the various numerical tests? It is possible to expand a tax increment district, any type of tax increment district within the first 5 years. So there is a window to do that. But with redevelopment districts, if you're going to add property to a redevelopment district, that additional property itself has to qualify as a redevelopment district.
Okay. Yeah, and I agree with Councilmember Abrams that I think it's a tool that I think would help our city move forward, given the redevelopment that's just happening all over the metro. And so, yeah, so I look forward to this, and I think this moving forward with the amended enabling resolution, I think that's something that I think it's good for our city and good for the council here to be involved with. Yeah,
Good,
thank you.
good, Councilmember Zhang. So I think, Mr. Beatty, we've each spoken. We're all in favor, and I think looking at the amended enabling resolution, consolidating the authority in the EDA, and updating the document and calling for public hearing is appealing to us. Now, City Manager Coleman, tell us about the logistics. How does that work? Well, how we do the hearing, or what, it gets scheduled pretty soon at a council meeting, or how does
Yes,
this work?
yep. So we would have to do like any other public hearing and give the proper notice in the calendar. It's 2 weeks. And typically, we won't get a lot of public input on that because people just aren't in tune to what that all means. But it's relatively simple. I don't know if Mr. Martin has had this discussion with HEDC about this being a possibility. I see Mr. Jenkins is out in the lobby, so we could talk to him. But you might want to call on Mike to see if HEDC has discussed this, because we will be taking that authority from them and giving it to you. And I think that that's good. We haven't really utilized HEDC in this manner. We've done one business subsidy loan with Larkin Dance Studio, which turned out really well. But they haven't really had a hand in too much of this. I think it's going to work out well. But in terms of making the change to giving you the authority, it's very straightforward. Mr. Beatty can prepare the ordinance, and we'll have one public hearing, and we'll be good to go.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Martin, do you want to comment on?
Yeah, Mayor and Council, no, this discussion has not been held with the HEDC per se about the enabling resolution. What has occurred is that the HEDC has already acted as the advisory body to the EDA and Council on all the TIF projects that have been approved by the city since the HEDC was created. So they have been engaged in this process already. They're familiar with the different TIF districts that are at the city's fingertips for utilization. So none of the tools will be new to them, but we'll bring them up to speed on kind of the refined process internal to the city.
Thank you. City Manager Coleman, looking at your calendar, we have one more meeting in November, one meeting in December,
Yep.
and then we'll start with the new council in January. So any thoughts on that, or we'll be discussing?
I don't think we'll get it done by the December 10th meeting, so it'll be in January. Or I probably wouldn't have it the first meeting, but we'll have it early in the year so we can get going.
Good. Thanks. Anything else? Good discussion. Thanks. I thought this was really helpful, and having gone to, Rail Evolution, we see around the country all these kinds of developments, and this is a tool that's going to get us there. So
Yes.
thank you very much. Anything else, City Manager Coleman? Okay. With that, we're going to adjourn. It's about 20 to 7. We have a lobby that is filling up because of a variety of things that are on the agenda. So I am hoping, members, we can start right at 7 o'clock. Okay? We are adjourned.